everybody. Welcome back to the Association of Cannabinoid Specialists and Casual Conversations. I'm your host, John Malanca, with my colleagues, Dr. Jordan Tishler, Dr. Adam Abodeely, and Dr. Sandra Carrillo. Always great to see you. How are you all doing?
Very well.
Good, good. Topic today. This is actually one of the topics that actually put cannabis on the map for people in safety, meaning with one of the cannabinoids being CBD. And so it kind of brought the wall down. And the topic is cannabis, cannabinoids, and epilepsy. And I think we all have a take on this. And again, it was one of the first topics that kind of brought the wall down and let people have this discussion. And so, Jordan, as our leader, why don't you take it from here?
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I agree with you. You know, the advent of using CBD for epilepsy really was a huge turning point politically, where people started to say, oh, maybe there's something valuable in this cannabis stuff. And, you know, we do need to thank GW Pharma, now Jazz Pharma, because they really did a lot of the science that ultimately proved the merit. And it was very interesting, I think, in that, you know, their early studies in children were all in children with these rare genetic seizure disorders like Lennox-Gastaut and Dravet syndrome. And there was a big question about whether the CBD itself was helping with the seizures or whether it was interacting with their mostly benzodiazepine anti-epileptic drugs, raising the level and thus helping with the seizures. And so over a period of time and a series of experiments, they were able to start doing these experiments with children who are not on those same medications, and were able then to demonstrate that CBD has inherent anti-seizure activity, not simply in conjunction with other anti-epileptic drugs. And I think that that's really remarkable. And the drug that's resulted from this, Epidiolex, really has become a game changer for children with these rare disorders. They've now expanded the indication to include tuberous sclerosis, which also causes childhood seizures. And, you know, I think the big question that you know, is on the table at the moment is, okay, a lot of that data, or all of that data, pertain to this pharmaceutical that they've manufactured. What do we now know about, you know, what we might call artisanal CBD preparations, and how safe and effective they may be, because clearly they will be cheaper for parents to purchase for their children. And I think, you know, that's somewhat up in the air. And I think I'll stop there and let the other folks have
sorry for the other folks. Excuse me. What I had seen with a lot of families that I've worked with, correct me if I'm wrong, is that when they brought this CBD craze out, where it was everywhere and everyone was talking about it, it's down at your local grocery store, the 7-Elevens, pharmacies now, there's so many, all these CBD companies popping up. I feel that it took away from the true benefit of this plant and the different, why each cannabinoid plays a role in the entourage effect. And I've worked with parents that, yes, CBD works with a lot of these epileptic children, but if you add something as small as 1 milligram, 2 milligrams of THC, the success rate went up. And have you seen that in your practice, Adam or Sandra?
Sandra, I don't know if you want to go first, or I'll let you.
Well, definitely as physicians, we always go for what the scientific evidence shows us. And since we have these beautifully done randomized placebo-controlled trials with Epidiolex, that is the only FDA approved product with a derivative from the plant of cannabis. Well, the first option for patients is the Epidiolex, let's say, or cannabidiol in different countries. There's no Epidiolex available, so sometimes they use another form like the Epidiolex, but it's this CBD purified. Definitely, and it has been different studies comparing the purified form versus the what we call the full spectrum. And there is some points that is important to highlight. When we use a purified form, the results are really good in terms of reducing seizures. But the truth is that you have to use higher doses in order to achieve good results versus when we use the full spectrum. Definitely because of the entourage effect of that, the theory right now, you use less doses. But in here we have to be very careful because definitely, well, CBD has the majority of the purified form, the CBD, let's call it the Epidiolex, that is the one that had the randomized controlled trials and meta-analysis and systematic reviews. The majority of the evidence is in there with purified, but in some places they cannot find these forms, so they use the full spectrum, and it works also for the patients. But I always, and I see this, and this is the trend with a lot of neurologists, that they rather to use the purified forms. They feel more comfortable using it because also we know the interactions and other side effects, and since there is another cannabinoids and other products in the full spectrum, sometimes they feel more comfortable using like a single molecule. But I think both approaches are valid. I've seen in the clinical practice both the patients that they use just the cannabidiol, the purified extract, with very good results. Of course, we have to give them higher doses, not necessarily the doses that they propose in the clinical trial. That sometimes they go 20 milligrams per kilogram per day. We treat patients with a lot less than that with good results. And of course, it's a reality that when we use a full spectrum, we use smaller amounts of CBD, but I'm always cautious in using like a very, very, very small amount of THC. So because sometimes full spectrum, according to the concentrations, can have high THC. So I just advise a little bit of caution with this.
Always. And sorry, Adam, can you share, Sandra, that we're talking sublingual, not inhalation? And what
Oh
you
yeah, absolutely. Because this is we're talking primarily the indication was for and the studies with Epidiolex were for children older than 2 years old, and of course it has to be like oral presentation. Like sometimes the sublingual form, I'm not that convinced that it ends up being sublingual because they end up like swallowing it, and it's even more erratic because it's a part absorbed through the sublingual method, and then the other one is swallowed, but definitely oral presentation.
It's
Yeah.
worth noting, that the actual pharmaceutical Epidiolex has a lot of excipients in it that allow for oral mucosal absorption. And in fact, in their studies, one of the most common reasons for discontinuation of the treatment was development of oral sores. And so it's, that double-edged sword. It works, but it also causes some problems. Whereas the artisanal stuff, which is typically CBD or extract in some sort of oil, typically, coconut or medium chain triglycerides, that there's really pretty good evidence that does not get translocated through the mucosa, but swallowed is absorbed sort of as we might expect.
Adam, in dosing, what have you seen with your patients, and have you worked with pediatric epileptic patients in your practice? I know you do a lot, not only being a surgeon, but and so can you share?
Yeah, well, first, I agree with all the comments that have been made. So talking about the challenges and everything that we face with treating patients with epileptic. I have not had experience with children who have epilepsy.
Mhm.
What I'll share with my experiences have been, which is largely dissipated as patients have been able to find other providers who don't specialize in GI conditions and cancers, which is really, where my bread and butter is. But early on, I was seeing a large number of adults who were, at the time, were actually being referred from Vermont because of the legality there, and they couldn't prescribe. So they were starting to work, to look for alternatives. And, there are two main reasons why I was seeing adults and walking them through the process of cannabis uses. One is to just first reduce the number of symptoms and seizures that they're having, and or to decrease or even to potentially rid of one or several of the medications that they were on, largely because of the side effects that they're experiencing. So, these were all very valid reasons that I could justify saying, yes, I'm willing to, work with the patients, but I've always done it completely in conjunction with the neurologists who are prescribing the medications, right? Because prescribing cannabis for seizures is one of these conditions that I would caution every provider against when it comes to making sure that you integrate this care with a neurologist, because you don't want to be responsible for somebody having a fatal seizure based upon your recommendation of using of cannabis. And there are obviously some nuances with using cannabis with epileptics that we have to be particularly mindful of. So that's, so I think it's also maybe worth it, for those listening, maybe might benefit just, what is the to have a better understanding of just what is the justification for using, cannabis and cannabinoids with seizure disorders. Well, first, we're talking about we've been talking largely about CBD as it relates to Epidiolex and the, the concentrates of CBD predominant medications. But I've been approached about using THC for seizures, and you say, well, that seems crazy. We know that it can be a proconvulsant, but we also do have literature that has showed people who've used THC preparations have actually had some disease-free remission, but have also, or not had a change in their seizure frequency and things of such. So, point being is that, you have to be very careful, with THC, but certainly THC, just by the sheer fact that, it can, modulate neurotransmission and excitability of neurons, that, that there may be a real mechanism of how THC could potentially decrease seizure activity. However, we haven't quite figured out who that might be yet, who those are. As it relates to CBD, I mean, CBD can affect excitability. Again, none of these mechanisms we have a full understanding of, but there's several proposed theories of how CBD might potentially decrease seizure activities. One is it too can modulate excitability differently than through the cannabinoid receptors, but also through the ion channels, potassium channels, calcium channels of such. It also has the the potential to even be an anti-inflammatory. Some seizure activity may be related to inflammation and things of such. So there are mechanisms of actions of how we know that this this can work, but so I guess I think it's just maybe useful for any potential listeners to understand how it might be working for those with seizures. Other messages, just some kind of other takeaway points is that again, we have to be very cognizant that there is a real chance that anybody with seizure activity could have increased seizure activity with the use of THC, and so whenever anybody's working with that, I typically always recommend, CBD, even isolates from time, which by the way, were extremely hard to find from dispensaries early on and things of such. And so trying to find ones that had virtually no THC in it initially was a challenge. I've become a lot easier, and we don't need to get into the whole isolate situation, story at this point in time, but it certainly, it was more of a challenge then than it, is now, but something still to be mindful of. And I certainly, am not in the habit of recommending, THC predominant strains or anything of such unless it is, would be under a very, unique circumstance that was done in very close conjunction with a team of people around. I think that there's, the other thing I think it's probably worth noting is, that's, what the other thing with treating epileptics is if they're on other medications is the drug-to-drug interaction, potential drug-to-drug interactions. And as what we know from Epidiolex and these other studies is that, higher concentrations can cause not just, potential elevations in liver function tests, which are also probably, also the reason that they can increase the serum concentrations and therefore potential for side effects from other anti-epileptics if given in conjunction. So again, this is where it really requires a coordinated effort, particularly if somebody's coming to, are on other medications to make sure that, these serum levels are monitored in close conjunction with, whatever neurologist is prescribing those, medications.
I just wanted to commend both Sandra and Adam for hitting many high points and important details there, and especially one that Adam touched on, which is, oftentimes as a cannabinoid specialist, the patient will come to you and tell you they have something and they want you to treat it. And, epilepsy might be an example. But, if you have an older person who comes to you and says this, and they haven't had any workup, they're simply saying, I'm having seizures, one really needs to think about that workup before you jump into treatment, right? I mean, if an older person comes with new onset seizures, they need their head scanned, right? I mean, this could be a glioblastoma or any number of other things that you don't want to wander right on into the treatment of. So I think that that's a really crucial statement. And obviously with children who have, these genetic disorders, once you've kind of figured that out, you have a better handle on what's going on. The other thing I wanted to touch on is that not all sources of CBD or cannabinoids may be equal. Just in the same way that, John, you were mentioning that there's some signal that perhaps full spectrum extract may be more effective than the purified forms in Epidiolex. We also have to recognize that worldwide now there is this availability of hemp-derived cannabinoids. And while the molecule of CBD from hemp is the same as we get from cannabis, at least here in the United States, there's no regulation around the production of those products. And so while the CBD may be wonderful for our patient, there may be other things in that bottle that are not so wonderful for our patients, including things like pesticides and heavy metals and other contaminants like that, including, unfortunately, sometimes nefarious things like opioids or benzodiazepines. So I think that at least my take is that regardless of if one's going to use any form of cannabinoid, the place our patient should get it is through a state legal program, and not through the internet or the CVS or any of those places where those are necessarily hemp-derived and therefore not necessarily safe. Of course, the counter argument goes, there are some people who are not in states where it's legal for any particular use, but thankfully that is becoming less and less common. Yeah. And I've certainly taken care of patients in those states where we have gone to great lengths to find products that are that would be safe.
We've covered a lot here, and can you leave any closing words for any physicians or medical professionals out there that would like to incorporate some form of cannabinoid with their patients of all ages? And so give you guys a call, give our organization a call, not only for direction, but also brainstorming. It's a wealth of information. And Jordan, please.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head, right? I mean, if there are clinicians out there who feel like this would be useful for some of their patients at any age, then they should get up to speed on the data And we here at the Association of Cannabinoid Specialists have a number of courses that would be helpful for that. We have the basic introductory class, Introduction to Cannabinoid Medicine, which is a 3-hour AMA accredited course. And that's sort of a soup to nuts. Starting with, I think this might be interesting, but I know nothing about it, on to, okay, now I know what I'm doing and I feel comfortable sitting down and talking about this with my patients. And then in addition, we have a specific course on pediatrics and a specific course on epilepsy. So between those three, I think we can get anybody who may be watching up to speed and feeling comfortable. Plus, we have a number of resources that are available for questions as they may come up in terms of our networking events where we get together and discuss cases. So there are lots of resources, and I would just recommend that anybody who's interested come over and join the organization at www.cannaspecialist.org, and we'll welcome you and help bring you up to speed.
Well said. Well said. And I want to thank you all, and thank you to our listeners for signing in for another casual conversation with the Association of Cannabinoid Specialists, and we'll see you on our next show. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you, guys.